Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of The Cheeky Natives. I am lining up these amazing guests for you. I have the very cool Sara-Jayne King on today's episode of The Cheeky Natives. I'm going to read you a little bit of her bio and then we'll get right into it. She doesn't need much of an introduction because she's just so great. But Sara-Jayne King is a writer. She's a now published author. She's a journalist as well, who was born in apartheid South Africa and has had some difficulties with self-identification due to the fact that she was the result of what at the time was an illegal affair between a white British mother and a black South African father. She's now written a memoir called Killing Karoline, which is the basis of today's podcast. And I don't want to give away too much. I want you to stay tuned because you will understand as you listen to this podcast why Sara-Jayne King is on our podcast. So welcome to the Cheeky Natives. It's so awesome to have you on.
It's so awesome to be on. Do you know how long I've been dying to get on Cheeky Natives?
We are so excited to have you. I've been telling everybody at work that I don't know if they appreciated it, but that's a different story altogether.
What?
Yeah, it's like my friend was Googling it. So she's like, okay, my book club is going to read this. And I was like, yeah, that's what you need to do. I'm quite happy that I've done that. So Killing Karoline is a very personal book. It's a memoir, and it's quite an intimate memoir. I feel like you didn't hold back in writing this book. Why did you decide to write it? Particularly because as the story starts, someone asks you not to write a book about it.
Yeah,
and what do? You go and you write a book about it.
The first line in the book is just don't write a book about it. I always say that the book, it wasn't really that I decided to write the book. It's that the story needed to be told, and it was getting more and more pressing within me that I needed an outlet. It needed to come out. So much of my life had been shrouded in secrecy. I was this sort of dirty little secret, that it got too much. And so it kind of just birthed itself with the kind of the universe coming together at various points. And then it happened. So it wasn't really a conscious decision to say, oh, now I'm going to write a book. And also I'd always imagined there would be a book because I've always loved writing, but I wasn't sure it was going to be this book. So it kind of birthed itself, really.
We're really glad that it birthed itself.
It was a difficult birth.
Yeah, like most birthings of great things, I think, are quite difficult. So the book is called Killing Karoline. And for someone who hasn't read the book, I don't know what rock they'd be living under, but what is this book about? Who is Karoline and why is she being killed?
Okay, so as you said in your intro, so I was born in Joburg in 1980, just down the road from here. And my biological mother is a white British woman, and she had met her husband in the UK, and he was South African, and then they came back here once they'd finished their studies, and they were working here at the Balalaika Hotel, again kind of just down the road-ish. And while she was working there, she met my dad, and it's so nice to call him my dad now, because for so long I called him my biological father because I didn't know who this person was, but now he's my dad. So she met my dad, they had a relationship, she got pregnant with me, but didn't know whether I was the product of her relationship with her husband or with my dad. And so she gave birth to me, called me Karoline, and for a couple of weeks it looked as if she says that it was difficult to tell whose child I was. And babies, unless you like really pale or really dark, babies pretty much all look the same, like a bit just like red and angry. So she says that for a few days or a couple of weeks she didn't realize that whose child I was. However, I've since spoken to my dad, who says that he saw me a few days after I was born in the back of her car. She said, come and look at the baby.
Wild.
She said, come and look at the baby. And he said, that's a Makwala.
Wow. As you can tell, this has been quite an intensive journey, you know. And your book chronicles your journey from being born in South Africa and then being adopted in the UK and then coming back to South Africa. But it's like a transcontinental journey, but it's also a very, very personal journey of growth. Having written the book, what did you learn about yourself looking back? So you've written the book, you read it, and you go back to Sara-Jayne King, who wrote this book. What did you learn about yourself?
That is such a great question. No one's ever asked me that question before. What did I learn about myself? Oh, yeah. I think I learned, retrospectively, I learned that a lot of the things that had plagued me as a child were to do with a lack of identity. I don't think we appreciate, or I certainly didn't appreciate, not having roots. There's something that happens to you as an adopted child that is, unless you are an adoptee, you can't relate to that thing of not having roots and not knowing where you're from. So in retrospect, looking when I was writing and looking back now, not even when I was writing, because when I was writing it was very raw, but now, like a year on, I look back and so much more of my childhood angst and teen angst and what was put down to teen angst was actually me not knowing who I was.
So a lot of people that I've spoken to have just been in love with this book. I've had lots of kikis with people about this book. Called my friend who's in Rose, and I'm like, listen, I know you've read this book. Let's have chats because I'm actually seeing the author. And she was like, girl, sit down. Let's talk.
Really?
So have you been
awesome.
surprised by the reaction to the book? I mean, this is a very personal story. And so many people have related to it. Has that surprised you?
Yeah, totally. It's phenomenal, and I didn't know how it was going to be received. And also, you know, I only moved back to South Africa. I first came back when I was like 25, and I think as a country we are very, unless you've grown up here, if you've gone to, you know, if you've emigrated or whatever, then you are considered as being from the country of that you've gone to. But the minute I came back to South Africa, I felt South African. So, but at the same time, I felt like I didn't necessarily have a right to write about South Africa because I grew up in the UK and there was, again, it was a lot of stuff to do with identity. So I wasn't sure if people were going to get me. I wasn't sure who was going to get me. And the reason being is because people find it very difficult to put me in we love putting people in boxes. We're still like apartheid mentality that we like, you've got to be white, black, coloured. It's otherwise people. So when I came back here when I came back here and identified as black, and people would be like, but you're not. And I'm like, not really your decision to make how I identify. My father is black, I'm black. I'm not coloured. We've created, not we. It was created, these classifications were created for a very distinctive purpose, which was essentially divide and, you know, conquer. Yeah. And it worked, and I'm not playing into that. My father is Sutu, that's the end of the story, that's, you know. So I was surprised. I didn't know who was, and I still continue to be surprised. I'm surprised when, like, young black kids come up to me and say, I totally related and da-da-da-da. From like totally different backgrounds to me, and then I'm surprised when elderly white women come to me and they do, like, in their droves. Thank you to the elderly white women in Cape Town who buy my books.
Yeah.
Book. They actually, no, that's not to say they get it, but they think they get it, and that's okay.
It is, right?
That's okay.
It's you thinking outside of your personal experience, and I think that's what good books do, right? They force you to think laterally and outside of your own experience and find ways in which you relate.
You know what's interesting though? You were saying there that, like, before we started about the chapter about hair, and I read that I went to a book festival in Prince Albert last year. Only black person there. Literally only black person there. Alma-Nalisha Cele was meant to be there. She let me down. She hung me out to dry. So it was just me, and I was reading the passage about hair, and everyone was hysterical. And I was like, it wasn't funny. This actually happened to me, and although there's a comedic element to that passage, ultimately it was very, very painful and traumatic to be.
I read that, and my friend and I had a conversation about hair, and we'll get into hair as a microcosm for the microaggressions that Black women face, right?
Yeah.
Like you're usually
microaggression.
Your first sight of trauma related to your body is related to your hair. It's related to somebody wanting to fix your hair, wanting to touch it, wanting to do something to it, identifying it as not the way it should be, you know, and reading that chapter, I was just like, oh my God, everybody has hair problems, you know? And it's just like, wow, Black women's experience is not monolithic, but there are themes that are universal.
Yeah.
That women in the US are having problems with their hair, women in the UK are having problems with their hair, women in South Africa are having these experiences of and that's, it starts so young, right? That this fixation with wanting to fix things on Black women starts so young, that you're 5 and someone's putting chemicals in your hair, or in your. I want readers to read that chapter, and I think a lot of Black women will be snapping their fingers like, yes, that happened to me, you know, which is quite unfortunate.
It happened to all of us. It happened to all of us who had any dealings with
hair. If you had hair, if your mother didn't cut it off, so there's a lot of themes that are explored in the book, and acknowledgements is one of the themes that you explore so intensely. You know, you speak about acknowledgements and how the painful moments in the story are quite closely related to acknowledgements, whether it's a lack of acknowledgement or a desire to be acknowledged and to be seen, and visibility. Why did you think it was so important to include this as a central theme, this acknowledgement and visibility?
It wasn't even that I thought I should include it. It was what it was.
There was no, first of all, there was no formula to the book. I just sat down and wrote. But it was my story, and my whole story was about the lack of acknowledgement and how that feeds into one's own issues of identity and self, and what am I even doing on the planet? And if you can't be acknowledged by your own parents, then what is your place in who are you? So, it's one of the key themes, but it's not a quote unquote theme. It's the reality. It was the story. It came about from truth and from authenticity, and so it was what it was. And it was difficult. In writing it, there was a lot of stuff that I also hadn't acknowledged. So that was another thing that I learnt about myself, I guess, was that there were things that I hadn't acknowledged of my own. But it boils down to the thing of not being, we all just want to be seen.
It is. It's visibility, and I think that's why that I felt that this resonates with so many Black women. That how often do we walk into spaces and people just don't see you, and the idea that it starts in childhood, and for me, seeing how it manifested in your life, I felt like was metaphorical for so many other women's lives, that we behave often in destructive ways because we're just seeking that visibility, and I was wondering that
but we're also seeking agency.
Yes,
we're like
I want you to see me and hear me.
I want you to see me and hear me. That's what it is. Yeah.
I want you to see me and hear me. Because you can see me but not hear me, and that's also problematic.
That's 90% of my existence as a Black woman.
I wondered what acknowledgement. So looking back, what do you think acknowledgements would have looked like to you as a child? I mean, so realistically, you weren't able to contact your mother, your birth mother, until you were an adult.
I was 14.
Yeah,
I was 14.
So you were a teenager when you first which is also just
actually no, sorry, that's a complete lie. I was 14 when I found a letter from her, but I was actually 21 when I
remember this so clearly because you were in varsity, you were in varsity, and you saw the social worker and post that scene. I remember seeing.
Yeah.
And what would it have looked like? What retrospectively, what could acknowledgements have looked like for you? Because
from my biological mother.
from anyone that you felt you needed it from, because I felt that you needed acknowledgement from your mother, your
My
mother,
mom,
your
yeah.
mom. I felt that you needed your father to acknowledge you, you know, and there was lots of things happening around you, but no one was seeing.
The thing is this, so let me start with the biological mother. I think a lot of people, when it comes to adoption, a lot of people assume that as adoptees, our primary, the one thing we want is our mother back. And we don't. But that's not what we want. Because we have parents. The parents are the people that raised us. What we want is the connection between, we want someone to fill in the gap between the time at which I was conceived and the time at which you handed me over to other people to parent me. We want that. And it's not that we angrily want it or that we bitterly want it. We just want it. We want information. We want to know. So to have a reaction of, you're the worst mistake I ever made, go away, I don't owe you anything, or it would be more painful for me to relive this, that just was horrendous for me. So an acknowledgement would have been, I've obviously known that you would probably one day get in touch. What information would you like? Thank you for getting in touch. And what information do you need? Because never was I looking for a relationship with this woman.
And it also, I think that secondary trauma is carried a lot in the book. But I think
it was worse than the relinquishment.
We're only beginning to acknowledge what secondary trauma actually looks like now, you know. And I thought that it was quite a poignant moment in the story, because we read the book and I'm like, okay, wow, Sarah's getting in touch with her mom, and there's all of this excitement, and there's all, you know, I was quite hopeful. I was reading that, I was really hopeful. And then you go on to get such a cold reception, you know. How have you dealt with that trauma? Because I think you sort of spiraled throughout
drugs,
the book.
alcohol, eating disorders. That's how I coped with it. Unhealthy relationships. Yeah.
And looking back on it, having written the book, was that like a cathartic moment? Like you read that and you realized why you had done things that you... Because in an early interview that I had with somebody who's written a book on grieving and on loss, whose character also goes through these very self-destructive... What We Lose.
Okay, yeah.
Who goes through these very like self-destructive coping mechanisms, you know, and I think often as a community we don't discuss the ways in which we deal with trauma, right? Because I'm reading this and I'm like, okay, she's in the UK, this is a first world country, you know, there's access, but I'm seeing that, oh my goodness, you are going through it. Like,
but listen, trauma is trauma, and I'm also I'll kind of touch on this more in the next book. But the trauma is trauma, and whether you living in Kailicha or whether you're living in a high-rise, you know, apartment overlooking the Thames in the UK, even though your access to ways of dealing with that trauma might be different, the trauma is the same. It's the same trauma. It's no better if you like lying there in your 100% Egyptian cotton sheets than it is if you're lying in a cardboard box on the side of the road, you know, outside Ponty. Or it's not. The trauma is the same.
And I thought that was such an important thing to see in the book, right? That. We often think that, you know, people always make that comment like, oh, I'd rather be crying in a Mercedes-Benz than crying on a bicycle. And I'm like, would you really? Would you? And having read that, I was forced to think of my own ideas of like trauma, you know, and thinking, oh, is it better because you're abroad and you have access to things? Does that make it better? Does it explain the self? It doesn't, right? And I think that we need to talk a little bit more about trauma as a people, right?
I totally agree. And I think also trauma is different to pain. Pain is pain, and trauma is the echo of pain. And the pain in the moment is pain in the moment, and it's that sharp immediacy, and it's the now. And you kind of take it as a body shock and go, okay, that happened. Trauma is almost perpetual. I mean, it's
generational.
It's, totally. You only need to look at how this country is now. And see the trauma,
and how it manifests.
That's what I'm saying. We have been in an abusive relationship for years. So when people turn around and say, "But you must just get over apartheid," I'm like, "Are you kidding me? Like, what are you talking about?"
Peak capacity.
It's like, oh, I can't even handle it. Yeah.
So I felt that you grew into yourself in the book. It was like watching small Sarah, baby Sarah, adult Sarah grow into yourself. And you do something very deliberate, and you choose your name and you change it. You choose your name and you change it. Why did you feel that it was important to change your name and then change it back? Because you arrive and you're Sarah, and then you change your name and then you change it back. And was that an act of reclamation? I mean, I found that very, very interesting, that you had shared a lot of things, but not your name. And then you shared it and then you kept it.
The name thing, I feel like the name thing is never going to end because I'm changing it again. But, so I was born Caroline. Caroline then got killed off. My biological mother, when she had me adopted, she told everyone, when she came back to South Africa from having me adopted in the UK, she told everyone that I had died, which, hectic.
It's a very hectic.
It's like beyond. So I still sometimes sit and think, what sort of person are you that you do that? And you continue that lie for years and years. Anyway, that's another story. But so, and then I was adopted by the people that I call mom and dad, and they called me Sara-Jayne. So actually they called me Sarah. Jane was the middle name, and then the surname of my adoptive parents. And then when I was about 6 or 7, I decided that I wanted Sara-Jayne to be all one thing. So I changed the spelling, and I wonder now. I'm sure there's some psychologist who can tell me like what I was doing there, like trying to
the act of
choosing
your identity.
And it's funny, and my mom and I have had a conversation about this since, because I had a brother, and they also changed his name, and I am very anti adoptive parents changing the names of their children. I think it's almost like slave owners, like changing names of to possess something. The child already has a name. The child has a name. You don't need to give it another name. The child has a name, and it's so crucial, I think, in terms of identity also. Because it's almost, and I write about this in the book, it's like erasing what once was, and now we're putting our brand new stamp on our brand new baby, and what was before we don't speak of. And I think that is where a lot of trauma for adoptees comes in also. But so then when I came back to South Africa, everything was, my ID and everything, and my birth certificate was Caroline King. And so for a while, when I came back to South Africa, I had to live as Caroline King. And then one day I said, "Look, this is ridiculous. I will never be Caroline. I'm not, I don't want the name that woman gave me." But at the same time, King was her husband's surname, who was not my father, but on my birth certificate is. But by that point, I'd met my biological brother, my half-brother, and I wanted something that would tie us together. And so I kept the King, and then changed to, in South Africa, changed to Sara-Jayne. So I went through a whole home affairs thing, and so now it's Sara-Jayne King, but it's changing again.
So staying tuned.
We're staying tuned.
We're staying tuned.
Hopefully my dad's not going to listen to this, because it's a surprise for him.
Okay, no, we're going to ban him from listening until you've done it.
I don't think my dad understands podcasts. I think it's okay.
Speaking of your dad, I found that the characters are complex, I think, and in a way that I appreciated, because often when things happen to us, there's a tendency to write about people in the way that you've experienced them, right? So even in the way that you wrote about your mother, I was like, oh, this woman. But there was a sympathy that I had towards her because of how you've written about her character.
Are we talking about my biological mother or my mom?
Your biological mother, your biological mother,
yeah.
Even your mom, and I'm going to expand on why I had a lot of sympathy towards your mom.
Okay.
Because of how you've written the book, and I'm not sure if you're aware of how you've written your book in a truthful way, but you've also given a lot of complexity and humanity to the people that you've written about. So, for example, your biological father, and when I was making this note, I'm like, I need to talk about your biological father.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
So, I mean, your father and your mother were respectively married. Your biological parents were married to their partners.
Yeah.
And then had you, right? At the height of the Immorality Act and, right?
Yeah.
Never mind their marriage.
Imagine.
Never mind their marriage. And you still write. You write about him still loving his wife, and you having an appreciation of that, despite the fact that he now had this affair, and then there was a child born out of that, right? And I'm not sure if you're aware of it when you were writing it, that you gave the people in your life a complexity and a humanity, even the ones that I personally would not have been inclined to do.
I'm surprised to hear you say that, but I'm also glad to hear you say that, because I got a lot of backlash from the book, from the biological mother, not directly but indirectly, from my biological families, from my biological mother's family. Dreadful, awful, terrible people. And they were very angry about this book, obviously coming out and revealing the secret that they lied and whatever. And I had to be careful, because obviously I do feel a certain way to her. There is anger there. There's
it's complex emotions.
It is complex, but at the same time, I like to think of myself as a person who has empathy and can look at more than one perspective. But I always, my even though I hadn't met him at the time that I wrote the book, my feeling towards my biological father, my dad, was there was always something. There was always something softer there that I didn't. Yeah.
Do you think that the something softer was also related to the fact that you didn't have contact with him until much later on? So I mean, you were 21 when you contacted your mom, and there was a lot of other things that I felt that she had her own things, and I felt that even in reading the book, I was like, this is someone who's very deeply troubled.
Very,
very deeply troubled. And I mean, because the whole process of you then giving up your child for adoption and then effectively killing this child and the memory of this child, and then wanting to repress the memory of this child, and then when the child does appear, you still are violent in the ways in which you interact with this child, you know. And your interaction with your father was not the same, you know. And I'm for the people who don't know the story, because it's not in the book, it happened after the book came out. How did you end up meeting your biological dad? Because this is the story coming full circle.
So in the book, I changed the names of some people. Just because it's not relevant.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what my biological mother's name is.
Yeah.
That stuff happened.
Yeah.
I don't want people searching her on the internet and whatever.
Yeah.
She has to live with what she did. She doesn't need, a couple of Killing Karoline fans to write to her and say, what a dreadful thing you did. It's irrelevant. For a different reason, I didn't name my father. And the reason that I didn't name him again is because I had a softer, even though I didn't know him, I had a softer thing for him, where I thought, I didn't know what he knew about me. He was also, the whole apartheid thing as well, and that he didn't have agency at that time, even if he knew or whatever. And also, I just always had this vibe about my dad that just there was something good. So I didn't name him, and I didn't want to cause problems for any family that he had, any other children he'd had, to just suddenly somebody saying, hey, this is your name, and in a book some chick's writing about you. So it came about in that I did an interview with my friend Sara-Jayne on CBS's show on 702, and he was talking to me and he said, basically, name your dad, because he knew that I was desperate to find him, desperate, aching, longing. And so for the first time I named him publicly, and then this kind of social media viral thing happened, and 2 days later somebody got in touch with me on Facebook and said, could this possibly be his number? And we called, and it was him.
I thought that moment was so poignant, because it was coming full circle, because you had looked and located your biological mother, and there was a rejection there that we couldn't put a name to. I didn't have a vocabulary for that rejection. And then afterwards, so I remember that show and whatever, you then finding your father, and I was like, okay, this is a full circle moment, and I felt that had you not written this book, that moment might not have come from.
I totally believe it probably wouldn't have come.
So that gave me goosebumps. It was amazing. Relationships. They feature so much in this book, and there are times when I just want to shake you. Sorry, did you not have those moments reading that book when you're in Dubai and you're with this dude,
Computer guy.
this computer guy, and I'm just like, what are you doing with this man?
Yeah.
I wonder if has he read them? Has he not contacted you and been
I'm
like,
not sure if he's read it or not.
and been like,
Sure.
hey, that wasn't really flattering.
No, you know what? Afterwards we continued to own a house together, and we actually he's a really good person, and I have nothing bad in terms of character to say about him at all. I don't know if he's read it. I mean, he lives in the UK. He might have slyly ordered it online. I don't know.
What were your reflections on relationships post writing this book? Because in reading this book, I felt that you had a lot of angst and you did a lot of destructive things in relationships. I was reading this book and I was getting worried when you're in rehab, and I'm like, please, the cowboy, no, don't do it. And you didn't do it, and I'm really grateful. You didn't do it, and I'm really grateful.
No, I didn't. The cowboy, yeah. No, oh God, the cowboy.
People need to read this book, so they know. You need to know why I'm like I understand the cowboy and why I was clenching every muscle that I owned.
No.
I was on call. I was like at work on call, and I'm like the cowboy. I'm like, Jesus, don't let it happen. Don't. This book has been written, mind you. But what were your reflections on relationships post that? Because you wrote the book and you read it, and
I actually haven't read it.
You haven't. I've read it, let me tell you.
Is it good? I heard it's amazing.
It's so great. It's so great.
But it's funny you say, what were your reflections on your relationships? That it didn't take me to write a book to know what my reflections on I know that my relationships are crazy insane, because that's the kind of person I am. I'm an addict. So that permeates throughout my life. My love life is always hectic. My romantic relationships are complex. I'm an adoptee. I have massive attachment disorder. I'm like, I will dig my fingers in till the last. Don't leave me. There was no Oprah moment. I knew from can I swear?
Yeah, go first.
I knew from day one that I had fucked up relationships.
Do you know what it is for me that I reading this and reflecting on it, right? Was I felt that everybody had those kind of men in their lives in some form, and I was just like, shucks, is this like a universal? Is there a WhatsApp group? Yeah. Right? Because everybody's had, and that's how I was like, not the cowboy, Lord, not the cowboy. Everybody's had the computer guy that you're giving a chance, like on a good day, you know, you're just I'd walk past you, but you're the safe choice. You're
not gonna break my heart.
You're the textbook good guy, and I must give you a shot because listen, like, this life thing is long, you know, and for me, the reflection was on the universality of relationships and how all the things that happen to us as children carry into our relationships, and how all the stuff we don't deal with and we don't package and we don't unpack, you know, how that just permeates into our relationships, and all kinds of relationships with friends, relationships with academics, right? Because here you are being the super overachiever. You go to university. You need to talk about your university experience, because wow, that was very interesting for me, right? So I had older people in my class, but I could never really quite figure out what their vibe was. And you were 21 when you went to varsity. You're 21. You're sitting with these kids, and
That's how I viewed it. That's how I viewed it.
That you're like, these children, right?
Yeah, but I was 21.
You were 21 and they were like 18. So I'm already like, it's just 3 years, sorry. But obviously, when you're 21,
that 2 years
is
at that
big.
time is big.
It's
because
massive.
From my classmates who had literally come out of home, I'd already been out of home. I'd had one really messy, awful, violent relationship, behind me. I'd kind of been stepmom to a couple of kids. So I felt old. And now I look back and think, geez, 21. I'm like heading for 38 now. Yes.
But you go to university, right? Having spent this prior 3 years just being a hot mess. Yeah. You go on to university and you're killing it, right? And you're killing it. Like, I'm sitting there, I'm like, okay.
But I'm also killing myself.
You're killing yourself. And this is what I want to talk about, right? That you go on to, and I feel like that's when I first start seeing this dysfunctionality really come out because you're in university, you're flourishing, you're passing well, you're proving to yourself and to everyone around you who just thought that you were just a mess and you were never going to get it together, that you've got this. But simultaneously, you are over exercising and you're in the midst of an eating disorder, and for me that whole period in your life is just proof of how, especially with Black women, we are always looking like we have it together, even when we don't, and even when we're breaking, and even when we're just a hot mess, we're keeping it together, and we
Always.
feel the need to keep this facade, right?
Always.
Because even you didn't break until much later, and that should have been a breaking point, right? How are you over exercising, under eating, and still doing well at school, and still like maintaining this facade that you have it together?
Because we have that thing where we keep going. It's never, I tell you this, it's never the big stuff that breaks us. It's the small stuff. It's you suddenly like get into your car and there's a flat tire and that's it, you fuck out. But all the rest of it, we do. And also the very nature of addiction, and particularly anorexia, is it's all about control. So everything in my life was so controlled. I forced myself. The same way that I forced myself not to eat, I forced myself to get my degrees. Forced myself. It was a matter. I couldn't do it today. I don't have the discipline, but I forced myself.
And that for me, that was so. You are falling apart, but we're in a world where there's no room for you to fall apart. Because honestly, you should have fallen apart at that moment. At that moment where you're under eating, you aren't taking care of yourself, you are overworking, you're studying, you're doing all of these things, and you don't fall apart. And that was such a telling moment for me, that there's there's just no room for us to break. And that's why when we break, it's catastrophic.
I'm really good at breaking. I'm really good at breaking. When I go all out. But really, and we don't talk about that.
No,
I still break. I'm somebody who is a recovering addict. I have mental health issues. I'm bipolar. I have borderline personality. When I break, shit goes down. I have to go into institutions. We don't talk about that. I have no shame about it whatsoever.
I wanted to talk about that. I think that we're going through a moment as a country. We've had the life estimate happen. We're having open conversations about mental health that we previously didn't have as a community, you know. And reading about your brother for me was one of the saddest moments in the book. And there were a lot of sad moments in the book, but that was particularly sad because it was this idea that mental health is such a taboo and such a stigma that almost getting help is just difficult, you know, and you then go on to seek help much later on in the book, and what spurred that for you? Because you'd just been coping, you'd been doing your thing, breaking, living your life, but there's a turning point where you go and you check yourself into rehab and you seek help.
Because if I didn't, I was going to die. And also although it was my choice, you know, I'd lost everything in Dubai. Everything had gone to shit. Like, really. Now you've said I can swear. Have you noticed? It's just profanity central. But everything had fallen apart. And somewhere, at that point, I thought, I'm fixable. I just need to go away somewhere for a month. My worst days came after rehab, let me tell you that. Do you think that your brother's experience played a role in you seeking help when you did? No, nothing. You'd seen him and no, it wasn't even. I mean, I hadn't even really dealt with his suicide at that point. But I think I've always been I've always known that there's help there. We know there's help there if it is there. If we're in a position where it is there, sometimes it's about our own decision as to, are we going to make use of it? Do we believe that we owe it to ourselves to take that help?
That's quite
and for a really long time, I did not believe I owed it to myself to get out. I didn't believe I was worth it.
Infertility and adoption come up in this book. And for me, I think that particularly as Black women, infertility is almost a taboo topic. You know, we don't especially we don't talk about infertility, and we don't talk about the struggles of not being able to conceive, because there's an idea that this should come naturally. These babies are a gift from God, you know.
Yeah.
This
We
should
need to start pushing them out from 21.
Yeah. I'm already getting questions.
Yeah.
Like,
you are. I'm 38.
I can imagine the scope of questioning that comes, right? And you speak about your unpopular views about adoption and infertility, you know, in this. And I know you've received a lot of sort of criticism about your unpopular views, right? Because women aren't allowed to hold unpopular views. What is your reaction to being criticized about the views that you hold, particularly about adoption, as someone who's adopted?
I have no interest in hearing from adoptive parents who don't want to hear from adoptees and hear truth. I have no interest in it. Because they are the same parents who are going to come to me in 20 years' time and say, you told us that, and I'm going to say, I told you so. I have no interest in it. It's not something I used to. There's, you know, we talk about white fragility. There's a thing called adoptive parent fragility, and initially when the book came out, and I just wanted everyone to like it. Of course I did. This is my book, baby. But I've now I don't entertain it. If you want to sit here and have a conversation with me about how my views about infertility and adoption are wrong, you go ahead. But I'm not. I don't play that. I'm so uninterested in that view. Until my belief is that if you are somebody who has fertility issues, and I feel for you, my goodness, you know, here I am at 38. I don't know if I can have kids or not. If I can't, I'll be devastated. However, if you look at adoption as your second best option, that's problem number one. If you then go into adoption with the idea of this is going to fulfill something in me, that's problem number two. If you're not going into, let's not even get started on transracial adoption, which is like a whole other podcast. But it should be compulsory for people who want to adopt to spend time with adoptees.
I think for me, it was eye-opening, because it opened a lot of things that we have secrecy about. So often when children are adopted, we speak about it in hushed tones, like, oh, she's adopted. I mean, with your family, it was quite evident that these were not your birth parents. Right? But there was still almost like a secrecy, a shrouding. And what I got from the book was that the secrecy is what creates a lot of angst and anxiety. It was almost as if there's some shame to be attached.
That's exactly what it is.
To the fact that you're adopted.
That's exactly what it is.
And I wondered, after reading this book, you know, what did you... I'm sure there's a whole book of what you wish that your parents had done, your adopted parents had done differently. But what do you really, really wish that they had done differently? What do you think they could have done to quell a lot of the angst and the anxiety that you had as being adopted children? You know, because
we never spoke about it. And not that we couldn't. We just didn't. And that's problematic when you as the child, as the adoptee, don't have the language for it. But your parents do, but they choose not to speak about it. So growing up in that, by the time you then get to an age where you do have the language, because it hasn't been spoken about, you think that it can't be. So you don't speak about it. You don't ask questions. Even now, you know, and I love my mom. My mom is great. She has very little, it's not that she has little interest. I think she finds it very difficult to talk about my dad, for example. She read the book and we haven't had a conversation about the book.
And I think I was forced to just re-examine my own feelings. I think that often, and I don't know if adoptive parents are aware of this, is that there's a feeling that you should be grateful that I adopted you, and I got a lot of that sense that even if it wasn't coming directly from your mom, that's the spirit, that you should be grateful that even though this one person didn't want you, here's this one person who actually did want you, and how dare you not appreciate this that I've saved you, you know, and that for me was problematic, and I was like, yo, this is a conversation.
And that is then highlighted even more in transracial adoption, tenfold. The white saviors.
It is, and this for me is the spark of some really important conversations, because we have a lot of transracial adoption in South Africa.
There's going to be more.
And we're gonna have these issues, and we need to talk about it, and that for me was one of the real things that I thought about. Because you see these families, but you don't have the language to ask, and they don't have the language to ask you about your experience, but it exists, and I think, I don't know if you've watched This Is Us.
No, I haven't. I'm not brave enough yet.
When you are brave enough to watch it, I think a lot of that will resonate. A lot of it will resonate. So hair. I loved the you speaking about hair, because I think black women's hair is political.
Totally.
It's completely political, and it was like it's like another example of living while black. You know, you speak of driving while black, living while black, existing while black,
being a dog owning while black. Let me tell you, dog owning while black is a thing. I could write a whole book on it.
Please do, because I'm quite curious about. We have complex relationships with dogs in this country, but yeah. So hair and the politics of hair. Reading back on it, having written it, do you feel now that you have a little bit more ownership? Because reading it, you're like, my hair's a mess. I don't know how to handle. I felt that angst. I felt like I wish that there had been a black woman around who you knew who could step in it, because you go to this hair salon and they make your hair look great, and then. And I'm like, this could be great, but it's not.
But you know what's interesting? They make my hair look great because they relax my hair. I'm 14. My mom wants it to be less wild and more. She wants to tame it and for it to be more manageable. And she's heard about that you can make it all straight and da-da-da-da-da. So they relaxed my hair.
Because I'd wondered in reading it, so I was like, what did they do to this hair that it only looked good for a few days? And I was like, okay.
But also remember, like, I knew nothing. I didn't understand. I thought once they put a relaxer on my hair that it was going to be all swingy and shiny forever. Genuinely did. I didn't know. My mom didn't know. She didn't. And devastating.
And it's that, and for me, this book is like the continual violence, even in the spaces that you inhabit, because you do your hair, and that's it. You do it once, and nobody follows up. Nobody's like, okay, what do we do about this hair afterwards? And hair often comes up, especially with transracial adoptions. Like, let's talk about this.
But you know what? It's such and other microaggressions, and this is what it happens. It happened to me yesterday. So I put braids in yesterday, and somebody. And I knew this was going to happen with this particular person. I came back from the salon, and the first thing this person did, this white woman, was reach out and grab my hair. Get the fuck off me. What is that? In what world do you feel that you can just come and touch me and that? What are you doing? My hair. Oh, it looks so pretty.
Or how when we change our hair, it's, did your hair grow? I mean, please educate yourself in 2018.
Yeah, it grew.
Like,
I mean, come on. Yeah. And it's
like this is
my worst is, you can do so much with your hair.
Oh my god.
I'm so envious. You can do so much with your hair.
Or the inverse of that when you as a black woman have a weave, then you suddenly want to be like a white woman. And it's like, no, this is not Sarah's hair. This is...
I sat in a salon once. This white woman comes in and she's having braids. I mean, number one, picture that. Very Afrikaans. Very. Black salon, we all there. And then she says, I don't think really, it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, when you make your hair straight and dye it and stuff, you trying to be white. She's in a salon with just exclusively black women, having her hair braided like both fucking Derek. Caucasity times 10.
That's like, there's a whole book in our hair, right? I think what I found really interesting was how you highlighted this so often, how just living while black, just existing while black, in a lot of these spaces is almost like a cognitive, it's like you're out of your body, And now that and then you make this move, we need to talk about this move. So you move often in the book. You move, you're in Dubai at some point, you come to South Africa, and then prior to you coming to South Africa, I mean, your experience had just been these Oxfam images and these envelopes, and then you move here. which is everybody's trying to leave. You come at this time where everybody's...
No, but reframe that.
Was it not?
Who's trying to leave?
Okay, fair enough. I'm going to follow that up.
Okay.
My comments is going to follow that up.
Okay.
Everyone is leaving. Everyone.
Yeah.
There's fingers.
Yeah.
Everyone who then becomes the source of the homecoming revolution.
Mm.
Who then comes back, having left and left for better shores. But you do the opposite, because when those people were leaving, there was a sense of, we're leaving, the country's going to the dogs because it's not run by black people.
Yeah.
And we're going for better opportunities. We're going to the UK, it's going to be so great. And we get there and we're like domestics and waitresses, because we don't have the privilege that we have in South Africa. And you come here. And I found that so fascinating.
Everyone finds it
particularly at the time, but you didn't. Particularly at the time when you did it. Why did you decide to move to this country that you'd had very little experience of? And all you'd seen, you hadn't even, when you described it in the book, you hadn't seen much about South Africa that would have even sold it to you.
All I can tell you is that when my flight landed from Dubai, when I came here in 2006 or 7, I can't remember, and the wheels touched down at OR Tambo and something happened. It was like, those Joburg sunsets, and we flew in that sunset, and the wheels touched down and I was home. There's nothing more I can say than that's what happened. I was home, and so it was never a question that I was going to live here. And it wasn't like, pros and cons, South Africa versus England. It was South Africa.
It was South Africa from, do you think it was spiritual? Do you think it was more than just... Yeah. And was that the first, because for me, in reading that book, I felt like that was the first time that you felt that you belonged to a place.
Yeah.
Do you still feel that
way?
You're still optimistic about it? Because in reading the book, it was interesting for me, because my friend and I was talking about this, and we were saying, often people are like, I'm just going to move. The people who moved originally that we're talking about, I think that often when we hear white people talk about moving, and this is why it was so interesting for me, when we hear white people move to Africa, it's because there's this white savior complex. And here you are moving from completely unrelated reasons. And you move here from the UK, but there's never a sense of, I'm coming here to be with my people, Africa. There's a very respectful way. And I'm framing that because of the earlier conversation that we had about how certain people write about the country and no shade. But I said that to my friend, I was like, this is something I need to say, Sarah, that I read this book and I felt such an immense sense of respect, and we don't often see that. We don't often see people move from Europe or move from wherever, come to South Africa and not be like, I was just so taken aback by how difficult everything is in this country.
People are so fascinated by why I came back. In a way that I don't understand. It was the most natural. It was the only thing that could happen. The only thing that can happen. This is my home, and that's just how it is. But people are so and I'm fascinated by people being fascinated. But the thought of coming back with that mentality of like, and I'm going to go back to the homeland and make it a better place. What? No, it was just home.
But are you surprised by that? Are you surprised by that, considering how this country gets framed, how the continent gets framed and represented? Are you surprised by the fascination? And I only ask that because for me, it wouldn't be weird that people would be fascinated by that. It wouldn't be.
But maybe because you grew up here.
Yeah.
So your perspective is, as much as we both Black South African women, your perspective is from somebody who grew up here and saw people going from here to there. And my perspective was seeing people coming from here and seeing who was coming. Never once did I, like in their droves, they were coming because they couldn't handle it because their so-and-so had been held up at that robot.
That's what I was saying, that there were people who were leaving, and it was at the time when people were leaving and they get to the UK and they tell us how terrible South Africa is and how amazing being in the UK is. And this, I appreciated that perspective, because it's not often a perspective that we get, that a black woman moves here and gets to have her voice and write her story.
Yeah, no, I feel hugely lucky for being able to. It was really important for me to have, but I only realise this now. It was important for me to have this book published in South Africa.
It was an important perspective to have, right? Yeah. Because we've read, and I love that she spoke about the town of Excelsior in the book, and I was like, okay, because we've all read the Madonna of Excelsior, but to have that in, and we had our ideas about the Madonna of Excelsior, and but to have somebody write that and to contextualize it, to have an actual living person, because it's a chapter in our history that it happened, yeah, cool. But to have, it's not contextualized, it's not, and this is why this memoir is so important, right? This is why, because how many more Karolines exist?
I'm telling you.
How many more Karolines exist? And there are questions and there are conversations about race that need to happen. I think that we're often a country that, as Kollega Putuma talks about, we have collective amnesia, that you can forget an entire chapter, that even people who are here, who go and leave their child in the UK and will just have this amnesia. It's just something in the water. And this is why, just in wrapping up, this is why this memoir was so, so important. Important to read that, and I don't think you should be surprised that people are relating to this, because these are universal themes, and you've written about them in such a universal way. The idea that you struggle to self-identify in a world where there really is no room for black women. There's no room for loud black women. There's no room for opinionated black women. There isn't even, just like, our experiences aren't even colored. So you're either going to be good or you're bad, and there's no in between. You don't get to have redemption. You don't get to make mistakes and come back. And we see that journey. We never talk about that. And when I read Killing Karoline, I was like, okay, so this happens. Like, everybody has a period in their 20s where it's angsty, and women who look like me also have these periods. And
that's like the biggest compliment ever.
It was. I'm making everyone read this book. How would you? I always ask authors this. It's like my favorite thing, because they squirm. Authors aren't great at self-promotion.
You haven't seen my Instagram account.
How would you describe this book to a stranger? So a stranger walks in, you're on a flight, they ask you what you do, because everybody wants to know what you do, and you tell them you're a writer. And they say,
I never say that, but okay, yeah.
This is the one time that you say that you're a writer.
Yeah,
you are finding your alter ego.
Okay,
this is your Sasha Fierce moment.
Yeah.
And you say that you're a writer. And you say, oh, okay, what have you written? And you say, I've got a book. And they say, wow, you have a book? Tell me about this book. How would you describe this book to me?
I always start by saying, because this does happen sometimes, people ask me, well, what's the book about? And I'm always really embarrassed, and so it's really self-indulgent because it's a memoir. That's like my caveat up front. But I'm going to stop doing that. And I would probably say, this is your truth and my truth, and it's wrapped up in a story that might not be yours, but you all recognize yourself in there.
That needs to be on the next. That needs to be the blurb on the next edition of this book when you reprint it. Again. Yes. So the Cheeky Nations has a very interesting racing system. So we have a land committee at the Cheeky Natives, and Tlhogonolo and I head up this land committee. And what we do is we don't give authors stars and popcorn. What are you going to do with stars and popcorn? We never do that. What are you going to give it? What we do, though, is we give authors land. So we apportion it and we decide. We're like, okay, really enjoyed Sarah's book, so this is what I'm going to give her. Okay. If I haven't enjoyed your book, then the land committee just rejects your application for land. So
the funniest thing that's ever happened.
Having spoken to the co-chairperson of the land committee, and having just read your book, we've decided that we quite enjoyed your book. And as a result, because you're based in Cape Town, and because you are in the Republic, and you are doing the Lord's work in the Republic,
I'm telling you.
you're doing, Black Jesus is happy, he's proud. We have decided that we're going to give you a wonderful wine farm in Stellenbosch. And this can be a writer's retreat. You can hold, this is up to you. So when the land comes, the Cheeky Natives has decided that they're going to apportion some land in Stellenbosch, and you can rename it. Zugisovana renamed the land that we gave her, and it's now Zugiso's land.
Okay.
And you're more than welcome to. I can see you on the wine farm. I can see you writing many more books. And
So funny.
yeah, so we can see it happening. So that's what we've decided at the Cheeky Naters. So we hope you're happy. And after we've given you the land, we're happy for you to flourish as the land committee, because we sat and we thought hard about how we were going to give you this land, and we're just going to bless you with this
I'm
land
delighted.
after you've blessed us with your book.
But I'm also coming to claim back the land.
Yeah,
People just need to also know.
we're ready. We have a whole land committee, so feel
I'm telling
free.
you.
But how you submit your application is you need to write a book.
It's happening. Okay, well, the next one's being birthed right now.
Okay. So you are ready for your land.
Amazing.
Just submit this book, and we're ready at the land committee, and we will be in touch. Our people will be in touch with your people.
Amazing.
When this land comes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much once again to Sara-Jayne King for what is a beautiful memoir. I'm enjoying. This is the year of Black women just writing these memoirs that have us snapping our fingers, taking off our wigs because they've been snatched, gathering our hairlines where we left them. And this novel in so many ways, this memoir, in so many ways is so necessary. It is what it looks like to see someone who looks like you lose themselves and find themselves again. And it's a story of so much hope. I don't know if you realized when you were writing this book that it was such a hopeful book, right? Because we see you go from hot mess to finding yourself, to lose yourself, to find yourself again. And we're so grateful at the Cheeky Naters that you've written this book that gives so much complexity and duality to Black women. And it's necessary to read memoirs written by people who look like you, who are going through the things that you've gone through, just to know that you're not alone in this world that often just makes you feel like you are. So from the Cheeky Naters, we can't wait for your next book, Birth It. We wish you all the best of luck.
Thank you.
As you birth this book, and we cannot wait to read it and give you some more land.
Thank you. This is a life goal achieved.
Yay! When you are the life goal of an author whose book you've enjoyed,
I'm telling you.
Listen, like no one at work can tell me anything for the next week. I just want to let everybody know. Don't tell me anything. Don't call me. I will call you.
It's so funny. No, honestly, I love you guys.